What's up, people? This is people. If people is still okay in
Yeah,
current timeline.
yeah.
It's not persons. Persons, peoples, individuals, human, apes, animals, things, whatever. This is Silas. I'm here with Steven. You can say what's up.
Hello, everyone.
And this is just part of our conversation series. I think, this will be one of, but we're kind of tying this into some recent conversation we had reading the Times article and just trying to wonder what's happening. What's happening with the news? So this article is from the New York Times, and I will specify that this is an opinion piece, and it's called "Don't Go Down the Rabbit Hole." Rabbit hole, not hall.
Yep.
Rabbit hall. What would a rabbit hall be? Like a school hall? That could be something with the conversation we've had. But anyway, don't go down the rabbit hole. Critical thinking, as we're taught to do it, isn't helping the fight against misinformation by Charlie Warzel, an opinion writer at large. So, Stephen, tell us a bit about this and how you found this.
So, funnily enough, this is actually sort of similar to me for the Time magazine article where, well, the last time I think what it was someone posted an excerpt from it, and I thought, wait, is this a real article? Then I looked it up, turned out it was. This someone actually screen capped the top of the article and sent it to me, and I'm trying to remember what the friend said, something like, what did he say? He's like, oh yeah, the critical thinking is the real problem, or oh, they're being open about it now, or something. And then I was another. Oh, here we go again. Is this an actual article? So of course I looked it up and read it, and we'll get into the substance of it, obviously, but it's a very roundabout way of saying you should only look at these sources because we don't want you doing your own research and questioning too much. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, Steven posted this on one of the socials, and he tagged me in it, and I checked it, and I just read the title, and it's like, wait, what's going on with this? And my just general take on this is critical thinking, as we're taught to do it, isn't helping the fight against misinformation. So take that front part out, the back part, just the front part. Critical thinking, as we're taught to do it. Something is either critical thinking or it's not.
Yeah.
There is no as we're taught to do it. It's not like making omelets as we're taught to do them. It's not like painting a painting as we're taught to paint, like in oil paints. Those are things that are processes. Oh, winning a football game as we're taught to win the football game. Those are things that kind of change. Critical thinking is critical thinking. You're either thinking critically or you're not. There is no as we're taught to do it. There's no spectrum when it comes to critical thinking. It either is critical thinking or it isn't. There's no
Yeah.
problems occur because of how we define X rather than what X is. No, it's either X. It's either that
Yeah.
critical thinking. There is no Y definition. There isn't no Z definition. There is no ABC. It's either critical thinking or it's not. So I am curious to see what Mr. Warzel is going to get in this actual article. I personally haven't read it. Stephen has skimmed it before, and we'll just go with a back and forth of reading it and having a discussion on it. Anything
Well,
else?
what I was going to say is when he says as we're taught to do it, I don't know who or what he's referring to, because I always complain about academia. I mean, we obviously did a whole series on that. We did a whole series on critical race theory as well. All of that is very one-sided. So when he says critical thinking as we're taught to do it, does he mean where people aren't going along enough with that ideology? Does he mean that is he trying to gaslight people who question things in general? Like, I don't really see what angle he's coming at this from. Like, it's sort of like I shared that meme a few weeks back about it shows Martin Luther. Oh, I'm translating the Bible into German so people can read it, and people are saying, "What are you, a scripture denier? Why? What's wrong with what the church is telling us?" All that it reminds me of this. It's like, why are you concerned with people doing their own work? Like, what are you afraid people are going to stumble upon on their own? That's what I would ask. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and then also when it comes to the definition of what is misinformation, who gets to
Yeah.
decide what is misinformation and what isn't just information?
Yeah.
And if you are a critical thinker, you should be able to parse out any actual form of,
Yeah.
if you're defining misinformation as in information. Like I had a video talking about there's a difference between fake news and faux news. Faux news is worse because it's based off of some truth. There's some truth to it.
Yeah.
So they add like it's 95% truthful, then they just maybe take something out of context or put something in, make some connection to something. So the truthful content gets you in, and then that kind of faux turkey type of thing where it's not just having tofu, but let's have something that's like like a false version of the meat. So it kind of makes you less skeptical to it. But misinformation, as in you're misinformed, where it's like maybe somebody says it's snowing outside and then somebody tells you it's not, and then that would be misinformation. Is that just a lie if somebody doesn't think it is? So I don't know what they actually define as misinformation here. If it's in particular, if it's meaning that, oh, this is somebody who is not telling me accurate information, or is this somebody who's they themselves aren't lying to me, but they're telling me false information. But I don't know if that still would be misinformation. What do you define misinformation as?
Because for me, what it is, and I think I said this in a previous video, but I think what it is that some people are so entrenched in that echo chamber, they don't see their own biases, so they automatically dismiss anything they disagree with as misinformation. I've had that experience a lot when I've debated certain social justice types, that anything I say that goes against their ideology, oh, it's you're spreading lies, you're spreading propaganda. It's, well, no, if I'm putting out something that can be verified, it's fact. Now, yeah, some of my opinion may be interjected, but it's like they're not even aware of their own biases enough to say, okay, I'm not accepting this because it goes against a lot of preconceptions that I have. Like, we've talked several times now about anytime a black person gets shot by police, knee-jerk response is, oh, innocent person killed by a racist white cop for no reason. And then if you question it, they say you're a bad person somehow. It's like, well, my thing is, if what you're saying is so right, if truth is on your side, you should want all that context out there because it'll prove you right. If it proves you wrong, well, you're not really interested in the truth. You're interested in a narrative, whether that be due to ideological possession, it could be due to an agenda you have, it could be grifting or something. But it's, if you're trying to limit that additional context, you obviously aren't being honest, because more context should only help you if the truth is on your side.
Yeah. I looked up here the definition of misinformation here from Merriam-Webster: incorrect or misleading information. Indubitably, a great deal of paranoid and otherwise irresponsible misinformation about the Kennedy assassination has traveled far and sold well. It's by Ronnie Duggar, which is interesting. As we've discussed, there was some relation with the center of the Central Intelligence Agency in the United States of America kind of seeding the term conspiracy theorist around the time. It was a little bit before the Kennedy assassination. Now that's gone to misinformation is supposed to be what lots of conspiracy theories are about and things like that. So a model of misinformation keeps clouding the debate over hormone replacement therapy for women. Okay. So with misinformation in this sense, does somebody have to be telling you something that they know to be false? Like if you're all the religions, pretty much most of the major religions that are taught today cannot be mutually right. They can they can all be wrong, one of them can be right, but they can't all be right.
No.
So if somebody is from one of these different religions, if a Hindu is telling you stuff about Shiva and things like that, or a Muslim is telling you stuff about Allah, you have a Jewish person telling you stuff about, is it Yahweh? I keep
Yahweh,
Jehovah for the Jewish faith, but they're all telling you about their gods. Are they misinforming you about reality, even if they truly believe that to be true? Or is that considered misinformation? Because if that's a misinformation thing, I do think critical thinking can dissuade most people from most current theologies, including the statist theologies of critical theory and things like that. But like when it comes to that, would y'all listening out there actually think that would be misinformation? I don't know. I feel they would make a special.
Well,
They would force that. They would put that in a special cubbyhole somewhere else. The compartmentalization would go on for that.
I would say, I mean, in cases like that, it's not that the people are consciously lying. It's that they're saying things they believe to be true, but aren't borne out by the facts of reality. So with something like that, I would say the people are not consciously lying, but we have to examine what they're saying and see if reality does bear it out.
And we're back in with the magic of post-production. Maybe you wouldn't have noticed, but the power just went off. That's something that happens somewhat occasionally here in Kenya. And there'll be something again with also some misinformation coming back. But I just was talking about the misinformation when it comes with religions. If somebody is telling you things from their theology and they're telling you with their belief that they want to inform you about how reality is, would you consider that to be misinformation? And I'd kick that over to Stephen so you can just let's see if we can pick up from where we were.
I mean, I would say, yes, it's misinformation in the sense it doesn't conform to the facts of reality. Are they consciously lying? I would say no, though. Like if it's somebody who knows the stuff isn't true but is saying it anyway because they're grifting or they want to manipulate people or something, yeah, that would be lying. But I would say, is it false? Yes. Are they consciously lying to you? No, I don't think so. No. That's how I would frame it. Yeah.
That's kind of a certain thing. Like when I travel around the world and live in different places, people have certain ideas about how certain places are and the expectations, and they're not necessarily misinformed about
No.
history, about how things are now, how the people are, what's going to happen when you move to a new place. That's a common thing that happens. So misinformation is a thing that does occur, most definitely. And just talking over the power outage, I was thinking, third world problems. But now I'm thinking, okay, like Texas problems, because
Yeah.
that's something that's happening in Texas, in the United States of America right now with the winter storm. So with the whole thing, like with climate change and all of this, that's something that I think there's a lot of misinformation in, and that's when I think there's actual intentional misinformation. Although for some of it, people are just well-meaning. Like a simple thing like AOC, one of our favorites here on this channel, and it's Stephen. I just think a lot of people in the world is one of the favorites. She comes out and she says it was because of was it because of climate change, or did she specifically say that it wasn't the green energy places, which are Alex Epstein excellently puts out the unreliable sources, it's not the renewable, it was the actual grid with the coal and natural gas and things like that. And in that case, you could be somewhat right with that because
Yeah.
majority of the grid still is natural gas and still is coal. And but you look at how that situation is, and I've been listening to Alex Epstein's Power Hour. It's a great thing. Maybe I'll remember to try and link it below. But he was talking about the specifics of it, how the exchanges actually go about purchasing electricity, how there's certain caps in the cost. Like they do a regular, like a day to, it's like a minute to minute. Every 5 minutes, there's a bidding system on how much the electricity is going to cost, which ones they can actually get to the exchange, and it's capped at 9,000. So during this last time, it's been at 9,000. So when it drops down to 9,000 per kilowatt hour or something, then is when they actually can sell it. So other companies are trying to get into the unreliable, this green energy kind of places because they can charge more for kilowatt hour, and then whoever gets the most, it gets to spend it. So this is very there's a lot of information that comes into how the power grid is actually ran. So people could be misinformed on it. It could come to a thing where it's like, yes, majority of the people who don't have electricity from the sources of coal and natural gas. But why do those sources of coal and natural gas have the limitations that they have? Because of some things to do with the green energy. And green energy is such a small percentage of it in the unreliables, is such a small percentage in Texas that even if all of those go out and across the board, majority of the people affected will be affected by other sources. So she's
Yeah.
kind of accurate.
Yeah.
She's also kind of not. And then, of course, we throw in the John Kerry's talking about this is because of climate change and we have 9 years to live. That is a complete crock. That to me is just outright misinformation.
Yeah.
It's not even I don't know if it's misinformation because it's like information you just literally can't have. Like, what does that even mean? It's going to be over in 9 days, in 9 years. What critical thinking would apply to that?
Yeah. Well, I thought of three different topics here as far as misinformation goes, and some of it are things we've covered, but I feel like it ties into this. So the 1619 project, which also published by the New York Times, where they cite facts, but they do cite facts technically, but there's an obvious agenda from anyone who reads it, and there also is some misrepresentation. Like for example, I talked about how they say it is cotton was 50% of the southern economy, but the way they arrived at that was through dishonest means. So that is misinformation. Now, the people saying it, I don't know whether the people saying it are consciously lying or it's they just like it because it fits their ideology and agenda. So they're just repeating it without looking into it. So in that case, again, you could make the case they're not consciously lying, but I would also say it falls on them to know how that number was arrived at. If it's just, oh, this sounds good, I'm going to repeat it, it's like, well, you're part of the problem then, and you're doing exactly what this article is supposedly against.
Mm-hmm.
The other two topics I thought of were I want to see it. I don't know if you saw the movie yet, Mr. Jones, about the journalist who exposed a Holodomor in the Ukraine,
Not
how that's been covered up. Like Walter Duranty, who worked for the New York Times,
yes.
covered it up. He got a Pulitzer. A Pulitzer was never rescinded. I find it amusing. Like I talk to all these so-called college educated people, they still think Hitler was the largest mass murderer in history. I was like, no, Hitler was number three. Mao was one. Stalin is two. Now, notice carefully, that's not a defense of Hitler. It's just making the point. If you're going to say this person's evil, he killed all these people. Okay, well, what do you call the two guys who killed even more people? But of course, it's covered up because the idea is to present socialism in a positive light. And somebody posted something they knew about how they talked to a socialist about it, and they thought, oh, this is just propaganda designed to discredit it. It's like, no, this is verifiable. You just don't want to accept it because you're clinging to this idea of the socialist ideal. And then,
And when it comes to that, I think I prefer that they be misinformed. I prefer
yeah,
that they're uninformed, not even misinformed.
yeah,
It's more uninformed.
Yeah.
It's not that they know about the Holodomor. It's not that they know about what happened in the Great Leap Forward, and they still advocate for socialist beliefs, socialist systems. It's that
Yeah.
they don't know about these. These things have been hidden away from them, and the things have been hidden. Like the New York Times, people actually think it's a valid thing. Like we recently having a conversation that another friend of ours posted about the retraction of the supposed Cizik. I think his name was Cizik or something. Brian Cizik, which is one of the Capitol Hill officers that was involved in the January 6th incident. And there was a report by New York Times. They just said, yeah, we were told by certain law enforcement officials that he died from being struck in the head by a fire extinguisher. And other people picked that up and ran with it. And it was being done on people on the left, people on the right, like other sources were talking about it because it's from the New York Times, and then they eventually had to retract that because they hadn't simply asked the medical examiner, but they just why would they just take the information? And our friend had posted that and said, for some people, this will just make them like, they will actually gloat or it'll make them trust the New York Times more. And then somebody posted, was like, oh, what, you mean you're supposed to mistrust them because they said something false? I'm like, yes, that happens. It's kind of like, they're better than Q. They're supposed to be better than a conspiracy theorist. I would think they would simply do the bare minimum for something like the New York Times would be, if somebody tells you something, before you go and post it on the kind of platform that you have with the standards that you're holding yourself that you claim to have, at least ask the medical examiner if this is actually accurate before you post it out there. And they didn't do that. They felt they had to post this out that way. And that, to me, that is a form. That's one thing that I wonder. Is that a form of misinformation? If it's literally just saying, this person told me this information, now I'm telling you this information. People say that's misinformation. And that's what was happening with the Times Magazine article. People were saying, oh, people are saying all this information means this. So maybe that attaching the means this is the misinformation, but the information is itself. So now they were presenting that same information and saying it means this now. It means this other thing, not what the other people were saying. So I don't think that defining what the information is, what it means, is necessarily misinformation. That is more, to me, editorializing. That's more an opinion, like in this opinion piece that we're going to get to read. But what was the third thing you mentioned?
So I was thinking of the creature from Jekyll Island, the book about the Federal Reserve, how that always gets dismissed as conspiracy theory and stuff. But then it's amusing because if you ask him, where do you get your information from? And he's like, well, I cited their own biographies. I cited official biographies written by prominent mainstream historians. I cited things that their children wrote. He's like, if you have problems with what I'm writing, take it up with all those sources. I mean, short of interviewing the people themselves who are all long dead, I mean, how much more direct can you get from that? But you still, if you look up Creature from Jekyll Island, you see all these reviews trashing it. Oh, it's conspiracy theory. Oh, he's spreading lies. It's like, take it up with the people. They wrote this stuff themselves. He's quoting them directly. It's like, and but this goes to our initial point about what is misinformation. It's like, you just don't want to accept that this is true. So you're finding ways to rationalize it away in your head, even though it's easily borne out based on the things people themselves wrote.
Yeah. Okay, so I think now we'll get into reading the article. As we mentioned, the article was put up on the screen now. Or did you have a third? That was the third thing, right?
That was the third thing, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So don't go down the rabbit hole. This is an opinion piece by Charlie Wartzel. This is the critical thinking the critical thinking as we're taught to do it isn't helping in the fight against misinformation. Now that should be coming up on the screen now. And we'll just have Stephen lead us off with the reading of it, and then we'll discuss it sporadically as we go, trying to put this towards like sections and things like that. So at least enough has been said for us to discuss rather than going paragraph by paragraph. Because I think the Times article where we recently did that kind of format was different, where there was a lot of content in some of those paragraphs. So lead us off. But first, there's an image here of our attention economy allows grifters, conspiracy theorists, trolls, and savvy attention hijackers to take advantage of us and steal our focus. And you see this thing, I can kind of guess and surmise who he would consider these people to be, and who he would consider to be upstanding members of society that would not report on something like Jussie Smollett without double checking, and they wouldn't go into talking to us about how it's very personal for them because they walk in that neighborhood and they know that place and they know how it feels to be somebody who looks like Jussie Smollett walking in that area, and talk about the background that they have with that person. Nobody on any kind of actually internationally known, usually shown in airports kind of network would come out and say something like that and not do a massive mea culpa when it comes out that Jussie Smollett was completely making that up. That would never happen. He would not consider that person to be a grifter. That person would be an upstanding member of the media who also has a sort of aid drink named after his last name. You figured out what I'm talking about. Okay, go ahead.
For an academic, Michael Caulfield has an odd request. Stop overthinking what you see online. Mr. Caulfield, a digital literacy expert at Washington State University, Vancouver, knows all too well that at this very moment, more people are fighting for the opportunity to lie to you than at perhaps any other point in human history. Misinformation rides the greased algorithmic rails of powerful social media platforms and travels at velocities and in volumes that makes it nearly impossible to stop. That alone makes information warfare an unfair fight for the average internet user. But Mr. Caulfield argues that the deck is stacked even further against us. The way we're taught from a young age to evaluate and think critically about information is fundamentally flawed and out of step with the chaos of the current internet. All right, do you want to comment on these first few?
Yeah, already just the language. As we mentioned in the previous one, that he started the things. Part of why President Donald J. Trump, who is now 2-0 against being impeached, he's actually the first president to have actually survived. Technically, there was 3 impeachment attempts, but neither here nor there for now. It's there, it's not here. I keep saying that. I need to just stick with it. It's there. But already from the start, it isn't helping with the fight against misinformation. Part of what they were talking about was saying that he needs to be impeached because he said fight in the speech, and then that led to the actual situation. And then they started talking about, it wasn't just a speech because they realized that people broke in before. They're like, the things he'd been saying before. And then today I just watched the clip that Donald Trump's lawyers presented of different people saying fight on the Democrat side. People like Madonna saying they wanted to bomb the actual White House. Johnny Depp saying things like, when's the last time a president was shot? Just inflammatory language. As we mentioned, I think it was discussed before, Maxine Waters going out and saying, you find somebody, you get in their face, and just a fight. It was just clips. So people say fight, war, fight, battle, war. So that language is already here. There's always a war in something, a war in this, a war in that. So that language is already set here, where they're like, you're just this poor mush brain who can't deal with all this information in this information war, and we're going to come in here and we're going to protect you from all that. Like, trust us to give you what you need to actually hear. So who are they to make that? Why is it when they talk about fight, when they talk about war, it's this explaining what the actual situation is, when the other side, that's violent? Or why are they setting up this thing where, we're the educated, we're the elite, we're the ones who can actually, we're the combatants who can actually deal with this information. You out there, you can't deal with this information. At the same point, you should also vote in this environment that you actually can't deal with information. It's like, come on now, people. Yeah. If they can't deal with the information, why should they be allowed to vote? Why should they have this support in this? What makes you think that, their lived experience is accurate if they can't handle all this information that's out there? Maybe part of their lived experience is part of this misinformation that you might actually be talking about here, but I don't see that normally carried over to that point.
So I saw Madonna had another post that people were sharing and making fun of, something about smashing the patriarchy. She needs to go away, honestly. She's my mom's age, dude. It's like you've long passed your prime, just retire, go off somewhere. It's like she's one of those people who's just desperately trying to stay relevant no matter what. It's like, come on, just.
Yeah, but it's also Madonna. If she didn't have that kind of mentality, she would never have been Madonna to begin with. She would just been some average person working in maybe in a diner somewhere. She may have started a business, or she might even just been like someone working in theater at some small town, wherever she might have been for some small town. She might have stayed there married and just been that, but she has something in her makeup that makes her wanted to go out and work and be that exposed, and that's hard. I think that's hard to unlearn, and it's so pathetic, but it's understandable coming from someone like that. Yeah.
Well, and then my other 2 points were, I don't know what people mean when they say overthinking. I find that's usually code for you're analyzing something and you're stumbling upon something I don't want you to know, so I'm going to try and deflect with you're overthinking it. That's usually been my experience. Like I'll question somebody, wait a minute, you said this and this. Oh, you're overthinking it, and you're thinking too much. No, I'm finding things you don't want me to analyze. That's usually what that means. And then I don't get what he means by fight for the opportunity to lie to you greater than any point in human history. I mean, was the church telling people you have to give us money? Or, was that not lying? Was the Soviet Union saying we're killing all these people because it's for workers' paradise? Was that not lying? Was Hitler saying we're on the verge of victory when he clearly wasn't? That not lying? I mean, like when has there been a point when honesty has ruled the world? I don't think that's ever been.
Yeah, we're just doing some clips. I was doing some clips for listening to clips from the Cracks in the Ivory Tower series that we had, and it was the cheating one. I think it was 108 or something.
Yeah.
So I was in there, and that one's a lot about cheating and lying and stealing and things like this. Like, why do we tell these lies? And we were just talking about like this whole idea that somehow we're in this time when there's been more lies. Like, no, there's been more access to actual facts and truth and the way things actually are today because we have more abilities testing. We have the scientific method. We have critical thinking because critical thinking isn't necessarily it's not natural. It's a human social construct. I was just thinking about this in general. Life evolves to prefer to seek comfort. It doesn't seek truth. Like the idea of truth, of facts, is a human construct. It's something from sentient beings that we've constructed. And preferring truth over comfort is something that is rather recent. It's definitely it's for all we know, it's something that's specifically human. I
Yeah.
haven't seen any other life form. And the other life forms might evolve into it. There might be things out there in space that actually have that, but it's not something that is natural in that sense. And it comes from nature because humans are natural. But anyway, so this whole idea that somehow we are now living in a time when there's more that it's no, there's more human beings because humans are flourishing today more than ever. So it's the same kind of situation where in the past, 50% of the people were going to lie to you if they could for the comfort. But in the past, you'd only deal with 100 people. So 50 people would lie to you. But now, because there's 50 million people and you might deal with 1,000 people in a day, it's still 50%. But at that point, that's going to be now 500 people. So it's going to increase, but it's not like the tendency for people to lie has increased. That's completely false. I think if anything, I focus on the parts where it's like now there's 500 sources to counter that any one of those truths. Whereas in the past, it's like if 50 people told you a lie, those other 50 people you met might not have the actual accurate information that would undo that. But now, if you hear lies from these 500 people and it's one of those people gets you, there's also 500 different sources of truth that could counter that. Or out of those 500, the chances are of you finding the actual thing that would counter it are higher. So that to me is something that I consider to be positive. But that again could be me just rationalizing this and looking at it a different way.
Well, there's actually that theory too about how like Asperger's type autism is the next stage of human evolution. I do wonder about that because people are becoming far more rational than they used to be, and that's sort of the stereotype of the people with Asperger's who are far more logical than most people, so they come across as very like socially inept and they don't read cues and things. But I also wonder, is it that things are becoming comfortable to a point where, okay, we can prioritize truth rather than just survival, as you say in the past, whereas now it's, okay, we have these material comforts. Okay, it's not every tribe is going to war a few times a year. So it's like, okay, we can search for truth and, we don't have to just go by those evolutionary instincts all the time anymore.
Yeah.
That could be something. Yeah.
And I think that's the Earth itself as a life form coming out of its infancy, of its place. Or if you want to focus on the human species in particular, you look at babies. Babies don't care about what's true or false when they're babies. They just cry and they just want the comfort. Oh, I'm hot, I'm going to cry. I'm hungry, I'm going to cry. They don't care about like, is this really food? Is this really the best time to eat? Like, am I really that hungry? Will I really die if this pain happens? If that shock happens, is it really something that I should be scared of, to be crying and panicking and things like that? They don't really go into that because they're still trying to self realize. And I think humanity has been at the point where we're jumping at things in the dark. We've not been able to get to a close idea of what the human animal is, what the human organism on this planet is. And just like a baby, once you start figuring those things out, this is my hands, this is me moving in space, this is the control I have, these are the parameters about it, then you start kind of thinking about things that are true, getting this information about this, you start weighing those. Is this information, if it's accurate, better than that information that's not accurate? You start understanding the possible benefits of the exchanges from telling certain lies or hiding certain information. Information becomes something that's actually valuable. And I think in the past for humanity, like information isn't necessarily that important to an ape, to a gorilla, but besides the basic information about its actual location. But technically, if you could convince a gorilla about the information about how other animal species end up actually leading their lives, they might be able to incorporate that into its own gorilla form of things. And if it's more accurate, it would help them. But getting to that point is something that is beyond the gorillas as they are now. So I think that's something that's happening with humanity. We'll get to the point where we're actually realizing that with the Asperger's type of thing, where you don't really you don't really get that much of a challenge to your life, not being able to pick up on the general physical cues of somebody because they're not
Yeah.
prepared to lash out and stove your head in with a stick.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're going to ask the questions, and you're going to get to a situation where you realize, okay, once we've dealt with the violent nature of nature, we can now go into like the nurture and see the benefits from selecting for actual accuracy and truth over falsehoods and misinformation, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. All right.
All right. So continuing?
Yep.
Okay. We're taught that in order to protect ourselves from bad information, we have to deeply engage with stuff that washes up in front of us. Mr. Caulfield told me recently. He suggested that the dominant roles of media literacy, if kids get taught any at all, is that you'll get the imperfect information and then use reasoning to fix that somehow. But in reality, the strategy can completely backfire. In other words, resist the lure of rabbit holes, in part by reimagining media literacy for the internet hellscape we occupy. You want to stop there or continue?
Just my only comments on this were, I know this is trying to be framed as, oh, don't look at stuff that goes against us because they're just spreading lies. We're telling you how it is. Now, I've read enough of the New York Times to realize they have their own biases and agendas too. Either he's not aware of that or he's lying about it. Again, I don't know him personally. I can't say. And it also, this sort of goes to what I've said it before in the series about academia and other places, that I think there's sort of this contempt for average people. Like people can't use their reasoning skills to figure out what's true and false. It's sort of the Plato versus Aristotle thing. Plato saying, okay, there's the world of forms, there's the allegory of the cave. We need the philosopher kings to lead us to truth. Whereas Aristotle saying, no, truth is open to everyone. That doesn't mean truth is always obvious or easy, but everyone is capable of arriving at it. They just have to make the effort. And I think with more of that Platonist vein, there's sort of that arrogance in that, oh, we're the philosopher kings who know better, so we should decide. That's how it comes across anyway.
Okay. I just want to point out the call to note again, the language being used, internet hellscape we occupy. It's like,
yep.
It's like, what is it? I think the lady doth protest too much. It's like, stop being so sensationalist. It's not a hellscape. Like, what parts of the internet are you actually in? It's like, guy's like sitting there drinking like some tequila somewhere, just in his house in his posh place, or whatever he is, but he's completely comfortable in not any situation where there's any actual threat. It's like, the hellscape we occupy. It's like, come on. Just talk about the confusion that goes on. And the thing with the last series that we had previous to the Times one with the cracks in the ivory tower, you have this situation where the cathedrals had control of these people that I think this individual might agree with politically, socially. You have the situation where it's like 95% of the Americans have been through K through 12. The cathedral is mostly the political left. The amount of money spent per kid in America is some of the highest in the world.
Yeah.
So who's responsible for not being able to prepare these minds to be able to deal with information online? What more are you going to do? If they've done such a horrible job, why should we trust them to do a better job in the future when they've already had 95% of the kids in that kind of schooling system? When they already have like 95% of the teachers end up to be on the political left, who would probably agree with most of the things written in the New York Times. Like, what is the situation? What is the actual improvement that you're going to see from that system? And maybe he's going to say we should throw this all out and encourage homeschooling, encourage different forms. That's something that might come in this article. I'm not holding out for that.
Well, I was going to say, these are the types of people who will say things like, oh, white supremacy is on the rise. It's everywhere. Then they cite like the Klan, which is a dying organization, or they cite like, they'll cite like some obscure website that like a few hundred people go on. It's like, yes, there are bad people in the world. There always have been, there always will be. Or they may bring up the dark web. Okay, again, how many people do you know who use the dark web? Like, I've known like one person who went on it. It's like
you just said that, and I was skimming forward, and as you were saying that, I was seeing you mentioned Stonefront. So just hit us up with the next couple of paragraphs.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe the next three.
Yeah. Okay. It's often counterproductive to engage directly with content from an unknown source, and people can be led astray by false information. Influenced by the research of Sam Weinberg, a professor at Stanford, and Sarah McGrew, an assistant professor at the University of Maryland, Mr. Caulfield argued that the best way to learn about a source of information is to leave it and look elsewhere, a concept called lateral reading. For instance, imagine you were to visit Stormfront, a white supremacist message board, to try to understand racist claims in order to debunk them. Quote, even if you see through the horrible rhetoric, at the end of the day, you gave that place however many minutes of your time Mr. Caulfield said, even with good intentions, you run the risk of misunderstanding something because Stormfront users are way better at propaganda than you. You won't get less racist reading Stormfront critically, but you might be overloaded by information and overwhelmed. End quote. Our current information crisis, Mr. Caulfield argues, is an attention crisis. Okay.
Wait. Again, why are they just assuming that the people at Stormfront are better at propaganda than you? Who's you? Who's the person here? Is this Mr. Caulfield considers himself some kind of expert? What kind of degrees, dash degrees, hyphenated degrees does he have? Masters and doctorates and things like that makes him feel he's that much better. Well, he can see how much better they are than the average person who goes to Stormfront, because he also knows the average person that goes to Stormfront.
Yeah.
And who can't get less racist reading that stuff? I was like, what? Like, what does he define as racist? No, some of the stuff in there is probably pretty stuff that people could read this and be like, no, this is really absurd. Like, I'm not agreeing with these people. That actually happens. And Stormfront, that's like you were mentioning, some obscure site. This is a relatively small site. How many percentage of the people are this? How much of the things that are actually written in Stormfront are verbatim being carried out and being included as part of curriculum for universities and places? Whereas when you quote some things from feminist literature, from critical theory stuff, from 1619 Project, you look at some of the people being nominated and some of the things they've said about how black people are superior to whites and things like this. And they're being nominated for being cabinet members in the current administration in the United States of America. And those are the people getting there. Those like Ida B. Wells, or is that her name? Ida B. Wells? The 1619
that's Nicole Hannah Jones, but that's the tag she uses on Twitter.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is that from anyway?
I don't know. I don't know. I was confused because I remember looking her up, and that's but I don't know if it's literary reference or what.
Anyway, so anyway, but that kind of stuff gets actual play. So that stuff, yes, there's a small number of people who are coming up with the content, but that content does actually get social spread. The Stormfront stuff might be the same amount of people percentage-wise coming up with that incendiary, absurd, unproven content going in the white identitarian type of things, white nationalism. That might be the main place that comes from, but it doesn't get the big play like black nationalism would. Like it's those two things are not the same. So what is the misinformation? I think things that you find in the Stormfront are as much misinformation as the things that you'll find in the 1619 Project. It's where they take basic things about history and then ignore certain parts of it and then say, okay, now this part means that other thing. That's a typical thing that is done of rewriting certain things in certain ways.
Okay, and if I don't get this concept of lateral reading. In fairness, I didn't look up that study, but the idea about the best way, I mean, this is an exact quote. The best way to learn about a source of information is to leave it and look elsewhere. Okay, does that mean I should leave feminist literature and look elsewhere? Does that mean I should leave critical theory stuff alone and look elsewhere to learn better about it? Like, how do you even make that case? I don't really get the argument. Now, in fairness, like I say, I didn't read his study, so I can't say why, but it's just it's kind of strange that you would tell people the way to learn about something is not to look at it. I mean, would they apply that to their own literature? I don't think they would. Yeah. And then
I wonder if this is. I think with the lateral reading, it might be the whole thing with like tabs. Like when I normally have things like I'll have like many tabs open, and if I'm reading an article, if it doesn't have links, if it doesn't have links in it and it doesn't have comment section, I normally don't read the article. Like that biases me towards not reading it. But often when I'm reading an article, I will be clicking on the links or have different tabs open and get to certain parts. So I don't go on reading something without understanding what they actually mean by that. But I think that's what it means. It's like, okay, if someone mentions this concept, maybe go to a different source and see it. This is we're reading this from archive, so I don't know if we'll pull up the thing if I actually click this link. But yeah.
And then my other point too was he talks about propaganda techniques. It's like, well, what do the left-wing comedians do? Their whole routine are propaganda techniques. It's play things edited out of context, derisively make fun of it, laugh at it, entice the audience to laugh, and then they clap. That's a form of emotional manipulation, and that's not me making that up either. I mean, psychologists have studied this. It's okay, you encourage people to go along with something, and you're one of the cool people if you can laugh at this thing edited out of context. So, and you're part of the group, and that works on you because you want to fit in with the group. Now, a friend of mine made the point that as much as I complain about some of these people, the plus side is that it's taught people like me to see through their tactics, which is ultimately good. And I think many people are capable of seeing through this stuff, maybe if not right away, but with enough enough effort and understanding. So again, it's a sort of arrogance of we just know better, so just go by what we say rather than do your own work.
Okay. Yeah, but those are the things that you mentioned. These are things that are improving. So when they set it up and they talk about how there's more people lying to you, but even by their own metrics, there should be more people who are available telling the truth. And I think that's kind of the case that they're making, like, where are the people? Because I checked up with the definition of lateral reading, and it's going to like fact checkers and things like that. And just come on now, like I by the time now, whether you're on the political left, political right, independent, or whatever, fact checkers have a certain leaning towards a certain area. Like, at least when you go to the Google, there's algorithms that bring certain sites up first. You even go to the people who actually run those sites. Look at how many people are involved with those fact-checking type of ecosystem that are also tied into politicians and activists and, and different kind of NGOs related with people on the political left. Like, that's the ecosystem. So if they're telling you about lateral reading, meaning go find what the fact checkers are saying about this thing before you keep going, that is something that they already kind of own. So that's I guess something why he might be advocating for that.
Again, don't read the Bible yourself. Just go with the church's interpretation of it. It's the same thing fundamentally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, but to me, at least, finding out the sources, most definitely do that. But don't get pigeonholed into the sources, because if you go to a fact checker, it's like, who's telling you that who's checked the fact checker? Who's checking the fact checkers to say that is a place that actually has it? Listen to what other humans, in my case, I prefer other human beings have said it, or actual core sources. The actual content itself, to me, is one of the most preferable places that you can get it from. Right. Okay. So the goal of disinformation is to capture attention, and critical thinking is deep attention. Sorry. The goal of disinformation is to capture attention, and critical thinking is deep attention, he wrote in 2018. People learn to think critically by focusing on something and contemplating it deeply, to follow the information's logic and inconsistencies. The natural human mindset is a liability in an attention economy. It allows grifters, conspiracy theorists, trolls, and savvy attention hijackers to take advantage of us and steal our focus. Whenever you give your attention to a bad actor, you allow them to steal your attention from better treatments of an issue and give them an opportunity to warp your perspective, Mr. Caulfield wrote. And here's a picture of Michael Caulfield. So what do you think about that?
So basically, I just take this it's almost like it's the usual thing of them saying reason itself is bad. And for me, if you're going to abandon reason, well, what are you saying? Are you saying we should take things on faith? Are you one of these intuitionist types? What else would you argue for instead? And that was that status I wrote about people saying you're logical to a fault. And I said, there's no such thing. I mean, logic, I'm going to go with Ayn Rand's definition, the art of non-contradictory identification. That's all it is. It's like, you can't have too accurate of a view of reality. It's like, that's like saying the math equations that hold up the bridges are too accurate. It's like, there's no such thing. I mean, if they're off by even a little bit, those bridges are going to collapse and people are going to die. Or I guess a more extreme example is rocket science. I mean, hence why they say being rocket scientists is so complicated, because if those equations are off by even a slight bit, that rocket could fly off in another direction. You have to get everything exactly right. So there's no such thing as being too rational. Again, if you are using reason, if you are good with logic and you read propaganda, you can see through it. You can see the contradictions and inconsistencies. So I'm not really sure the angle this is getting here. Or it's again, unless the goal is to sort of undercut reason and just say, no, don't trust your reason, go with what we say instead. And that's just gaslighting. So.
And that's what I see with certain people who are titles, like, this is what you should think about this. Yeah. This is the most important thing about this. How should you believe of this? How should you understand this? It's like, no, just present the information and let people deal with it. But as they mentioned before, they're talking about how, you're not able to actually handle this thing. They talk about, the hijackers are taking advantage of us. You take advantage of us, of children, of people who don't know better. But then they say here, you see, they're stealing our focus, and then said, whenever you give your attention to a bad actor. It's like, no, I don't pay taxes. They take the taxes from me. Yeah. It's extorted money from me. You don't give the government money. The government takes that money from you. So in this situation, somebody can't both steal something from you and you give that thing to them. No, if they're stealing your focus, how is somebody doing that? Nobody is coming here and being like, you have to click Stormfront
No,
and read this stuff.
no,
It's
no.
you going there and reading the stuff. So
Yeah.
have the responsibility, take the agency, and that's part of the beginning. Be critical on yourself, be critical about your thinking, and take that agency in it. And don't just say that somebody else is controlling your thinking, where you're going to go, and taking your attention and things like that. I don't think that's positive. And then again, where are they learning? Where is the attention deficit issue? What is the issue happening if most of these people ostensibly are people who are of adult age plus 18 plus and have been through the K through 12 system? How come you haven't developed some way where they can actually keep attention? Maybe the content in that K through 12 system doesn't actually hold people's attention, and the whole system of thinking in there is just entirely messed up. And again, he might bring that up in here. We're getting towards the end of this article, I think. At least we're halfway through. I still don't see him actually addressing where supposedly these children or these people are supposed to learn this better form or this faulty form came from. I don't know.
Well, one thing this whole GameStop rebellion in line with Wall Street Bets has sort of taught me is this whole thing about hedge funds and how they influence the financial media and they put out stuff to serve their interests. Because I know, for example, all these hedge funds are shorting GameStop and AMC, and there's all these articles that keep coming out. You better sell it soon. You better sell it soon. Better get out of this. And there's rumors too that they pay shills to write comments in the sections on the stock trading apps. Now, again, I don't have solid proof of that, but you do wonder because like there's certain people's profiles if you click on, they'll write like 100 negative comments on one stock within a day, and you kind of wonder like why would somebody do that otherwise? And then they'll say things like, oh, you better get out of here. I don't want to see people lose money. It's like, you mean to tell me that a random person is concerned with strangers on the internet losing money, and they're going to go back to a place multiple times a day, every day, to get people to sell to avoid losing money? Come on, who would do that unless they're getting paid to?
Yeah, it's just the kind of thing where it's like if they're not doing that, they should be. So that's definitely what I'd do if I was in that kind of position, I think, and I had lower scruples if I was more focused on just earning the money as some of the people are.
Yeah, because I get like, okay, if you're worried about a friend or family member and you talk to them, but like random people on the internet, you're really that concerned with random people losing money. Meanwhile, the hedge funds want prices to go down so they can buy them back cheap. It's like, come on. I mean, why else are you enticing me to sell? I don't think you're really that concerned with random people.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Leave us off for the next section.
All right. One way to combat this dynamic is to change how we teach media literacy. Internet users need to learn that our attention is a scarce commodity that is to be spent wisely.
Agreed.
In 2016, Mr. Caulfield met Mr. Weinberg, who suggested modeling the process after the way professional fact-checkers assess information. Mr. Caulfield refined the practice into 4 simple principles. Number 1, stop. Number 2, investigate the source. Number 3, find better coverage. Number 4, trace claims, quotes, and media to the original context, otherwise known as SIFT, SIFT acronym. You want me just to read the next one here too? Or?
Yeah.
All right. Mr. Caulfield walked me through the process using an Instagram post from Robert F. Kennedy Jr., a prominent anti-vaccine activist, falsely alleging a link between the human papillomavirus vaccine and cancer. Quote, if this is not a claim where I have a depth of understanding, then I want to stop for a second and before going further, just investigate the source, end quote, Mr. Caulfield said. He copied Mr. Kennedy's name in the Instagram post and popped it into Google. Quote, look how fast this is, he told me as he counted the seconds out loud. In 15 seconds, he navigated to Wikipedia and strolled through the introductory section of this page, highlighting with his cursor the last sentence, which reads that Mr. Kennedy is an anti-vaccine activist and a conspiracy theorist. All right, we have to stop here. Take it away, and I have some stuff to say.
Look, okay, the SIP thing. First of all, whenever people drop acronyms, I'm like, what are you, children? Like, what are you the acronym for? Like, if it's outside of the military, I'm like, just what? What's going on? So stop, investigate the source, find better coverage. Then he drops Google, because that's, of course, the best coverage you can have out there. Why don't you try other platforms? I know me actually do searches on different search engines. Then he talks to Wikipedia. He drops Wikipedia as one of his better sources when you can literally go in and edit Wikipedia. When Wikipedia itself locks certain pages with false information about the actual people who are like, dude, this is not what happened to me.
Yeah.
This is not me. Yet that whole thing is locked. Like, who's actually going? There was some guy who supposedly spends like, there's somebody who supposedly had done the most. He'd done like a significant percentage of the edits on Wikipedia with this one guy just going in and editing it. So what makes that one person probably had Asperger's, and it's probably those next level human beings to actually go in there and be able to get that information. For me, Wikipedia is a good place to point me in a certain direction. But
Yeah.
whose opinion is it that Robert Kennedy is a conspiracy theorist and anti-vaccine activist? And what's so wrong about being an anti-vaccine activist? Because it depends on which vaccines. Is it all vaccines? Is he for any vaccine? Should we just take all the vaccines coming out of China? Or are you going to say that's a different one? We should actually have a different kind of thing with that vaccine. Should we take them twice? Anyway, you go.
and on a very superficial level, I get the first point. Like I had this discussion with someone a few years ago, how the one thing that mainstream media outlets are supposed to do is that they have an editorial board, they have a list, so there's like a due process for publishing an article. Now, obviously, this fails, as we know from the New York Times and other things, but there is a little bit more of a due process, whereas the criticism of these independent outlets is that anyone can just sit at a desk and spout off whatever, and if they get enough of a following, they can misinform people. So again, superficially, I get that, but the problem, like you said a few minutes ago, is who fact checks the fact checkers. It's not, okay, we have some divine beings in the New York Times editorial room who are honest 100% of the time, and anything run through them is going to inform everyone. No, come on, that's not how things work. These people have biases, their own agendas, so on. And then citing Google, number one, he doesn't know about the algorithms and how they're rigged, or he does know and he's lying. And Wikipedia, I mean, I could barely say that with a straight face. I mean, in even culinary school, they said to us, don't use this as a source. Anyone can add anything. Like somebody who had a lawsuit against a chef could smear them on that page, and you could publish that in a paper about them, and it could not even be true. So things, you know, you don't rely on those sources. Now, like you say, you can use that as sort of a heuristic tool. Like you can see, okay, what are some general things, and delve further into other things yourself, but use it as a primary source. No.
Yeah. And uh, it's just the general biases that we see. Maybe we'll continue with it.
All right. Is Robert F. Kennedy the best unbiased source on information about a vaccine? I'd argue no, and that's good enough to know we should probably just move on, he said. He probed deeper into the method to find better coverage by copying the main claim in Mr. Kennedy's post and pasting that into a Google search. The first two results came from an Agence France Presse fact checks website and the National Institutes of Health. His quick searches showed a pattern. Mr. Kennedy's claims were outside the consensus, a sign they were motivated by something other than science. You want
to trust in the science.
Yeah.
Motivated other than something. This is a sign they were motivated. What sign is that? Because there's consensus. Science, again, science has never been about consensus. It's about tests. It's a process. Critical thinking is not about consensus. What is the consensus of what women should wear in Saudi Arabia? Is that scientific? Is that based on critical thinking? Or is that a consensus that occurs in Saudi Arabia due to various other reasons? Consensus can become, like, there was this one quote, it's like, I think it's like, it's something about to do with like with a mob, like, people should be worried about things like with consensus or mobs and majority rules, because like in a mob, often the only dissenting vote is a person about to get lynched. So you have that situation where there was a time when the heliocentric, like it was not heliocentric model was outside of the consensus. That's accurate. There was a time when germs were outside of the consensus. And these people have, it's not even like an end of history. It's almost like,
it kind of is, though. It kind of is. It's like, this is like the final point. You know, it's like we figured everything out. Now we're just going to carry on into eternal bliss from here.
I want to say it's kind of like a post-history, because it's like end of history is different. Like end of history is like you're still part of history. You're at the end of it. I think it's like post-history where it's like everything of history is separate. Like this is a different existence. This is like a different season, different universe of that book is shut. So the historical things that were happening in that sense, where consensus led to some horrific things.
Yeah.
What was the consensus about Jews in Nazi Germany? What was the consensus going on there? What was the consensus from the economists of what the Jews were doing to the economy there? What was the consensus of the actual what it means to genetically be a Jew at that time? They were using scientific processes at that time. Those were the things they were actually using. And I'm not saying that the people today are like that, but it's a general basics of saying just because something is consensus doesn't mean we should believe it. What was the general consensus about a female president like 50 years ago? What is the general consensus about black people learning in the same schools as white people.
Yeah.
Well, if you're a critical theorist right now, it's the same consensus that it was pre-civil rights. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
For most human beings, they've
Yeah.
changed that. Said, okay, yeah, black people can date white people. Black people can learn with like white, but for critical theorists and people like that, they're bringing it back and saying no, they should be separate. But like, those are the things. Consensus is just consensus. That doesn't mean that much to me in my estimation.
Well, but also this whole thing I could barely say with a straight face about best unbiased source of information. Okay, these are the same people who will look to Greta Thunberg for climate change. People who look to AOC for climate change. They're not climate scientists because you always hear that. Oh, these people aren't climate scientists. They shouldn't comment. Okay, but AOC is qualified too. Greta, who's what, a high school dropout who just turned 18 is. It's like, or our guy Phil Magnus with the 1619 Project. Oh, he's not a historian of the 19th century. He's not qualified to comment. They cite journalists and sociologists for their sources. It's like there's this very strange selective appeal to authority, but it seems to only be going in one direction. And I've never had anyone on the left justify this to me. It just seems to be this person says things I like, so I'm going to consider them an authority versus, no, this person's not on my side. Like someone like Judith Curry, who is an actual climate scientist and even had a prominent position, but because she questioned the quote unquote consensus, they basically made her life hell. But she is technically qualified, but then they go to Greta, who is, again, a high school dropout, and they rely on her. It's like, it makes no sense.
Yeah, like the consensus about from who, about what. And then also when it comes to how often has the New York Times and those other people used anonymous sources. So it should be a kind of thing where should you completely just disregard anything that says anonymous sources? Because if it's an anonymous source, you can't use the SIFT method, right? It's kind of hard to actually go if you're talking about the actual person. Yet how often did we hear anonymous sources report this about Trump? Anonymous sources say this about this person, and that was that must be true. That's the way it is. It's a kind of a leaker kind of situation. I don't know these kind of things.
Well, and also just one other point, I mentioned it a few times. I recommend that book Scientocracy, which talks about various quote unquote consensuses in science and how it's often because people are invested in that status quo because they make money, there's ideological reasons, all that. And it's often hard to overturn that because people will build their careers around certain things. Like you just said, the pterocentric view of the universe and the heliocentric, enough people believe that where that became accepted. All these people believed salt was going to kill you with high blood pressure. Of course, now we know that's not true, but it took a while for these changes to happen because so many people are invested in the status quo. So when people act like, oh, this is a consensus, this is indisputable, it's like, well, they've said that every single time for centuries now. So it doesn't really hold water.
Okay, so back to the reading of this.
Sure.
The amazing article. Okay. The SIFT method and the instructional teaching unit, about 6 hours of classwork that accompanies it, has been picked up by dozens of universities across the country and in some Canadian high schools. What is potentially revolutionary about SIFT is that it focuses on making quick judgments. A SIFT fact check can and should take just 30, 60, 90 seconds to evaluate a piece of content. The 4 steps are based on the premise that you often make a better decision with less information than you do with more. What?
Yes.
What? What? It's like short-circuited. Okay, let me try to make it through this paragraph. The 4 steps are based on the premise that you often make a better decision with less information than you do with more. Although spending 15 minutes to determine a single fact in order to decipher a tweet or a piece of news coming from a source you've never seen before will often leave you more confused than you were before. The question we want students asking, is this a good source for this purpose, or could I find something better relatively quickly? Mr. Caulfield said. I've seen in the classroom where a student finds a great answer in 3 minutes, but then keeps going and ends up won over by bad information.
Oh, man. I partially blame Twitter for this. Like, people think that all the world's problems and philosophies can be reduced to like a few sentences. I sort of have this ongoing discussion with my brother where he'll complain like I'm too long-winded or something. I'm like, you understand, I can't explain like entire principles, entire systems in like 1 or 2 sentences. The world is not that simple. If it were that simple, we would have figured out all these problems millennia ago. It's like Twitter is designed to do punchy, short things. Now, there are people like James Lindsay, who obviously I post a lot from, that will have multiple tweets. So he'll have like a 10 tweet thread or something to explain an idea. But it's like, that's usually how it goes. It's like, you want me to ask, like, you want to ask someone and have them explain like what critical race theory is, how it's not how it's the antithesis actually of the civil rights movement, all this. It's like you can't write that in one sentence. You need more in-depth information. So it's like it's almost like they're trying to I read this and all I see is gaslighting to try and get people, prevent people from looking further into things themselves. That's all I see it as.
Yeah, because above they're talking about the attention issue. They're saying you can't handle these things. Like they give you a deluge of stuff. Don't look for more information. You can't do it. Just trust us. Take these sources. Take Google. Take these 30 to 60 seconds. We'll tell you which the good sources are. Go to Wikipedia and somebody else will handle that for you. We'll hand this to you. You don't have to put in that work yourself. How dare they actually have you actually do that effort yourself? And this is a disgusting premise. They're talking about an attention war being an issue. Is that what they mentioned above here? They said something about attention. Mr. Colford said it's an attention crisis, the current information crisis, attention crisis. And then here they're just saying, oh, no, you shouldn't be able to be in a situation where something can hold your attention for a while. You should be able to just, in a few seconds, go get this thing and then get the answer and then move on to something else. That is a lack of attention. That is a lack of ability to be able to focus on an actual thing. Like, let me develop this one idea. Let me focus on this one thing and let it grow. Let me make a mistake and then learn how I made the mistake and build off of that so I don't make that mistake again, instead of just saying, I'm just going to go to the source. Again, he might address it later on, but to me, that's a disgusting statement to make, that you shouldn't have more information.
And I remember I tagged you in it. I think you actually reposted a while back. There's a book, Notes on Epistemology by Father Toohey. That's one of Rothbard's favorite sources on epistemology. And he talks about one of the tenets of epistemology is that we acknowledge that errors have been made and we correct those errors. That's how knowledge advances. This idea that you can only read these things because you have to get it right the first time. Well, if nobody took those risks and made those mistakes, the knowledge wouldn't advance. Because if enough people make errors and enough people pick up on it, then that's how it gets corrected and things progress. But if it's just trust us to decide what's right and go along with it, okay, we're back into the realm of philosopher kings, essentially.
Yeah, and there's certain things that develop in different levels. Like the amount of information and knowledge about using computers and coding that you needed to actually use a computer, use the internet, like 20 years ago, is a lot different than what you do now. Now you just pick up a phone, you just sign on, and you get that information. So we understand there's certain things like that, but certain things literally need more information, certain topics, certain concepts that I think growing minds should use that are important that affect human beings take more than 30, 60, 90 seconds to be correct about. Some of those things, it bears to focus. We don't need to be in these schooling environments where we're learning 20 different subjects, and some of the things would benefit from focusing on one topic for multiple years and being like, we're going to actually specialize in this because it's worthwhile. Some things can't be limited. Some things, even just the language we use, this is something that if you speak several languages and different languages, you understand that the certain languages have certain terms and phrases for certain words and experiences that are very specific to that language. I think this is one thing that's often said with like the Eskimos. They have like 26 different words for snow. There's no English equivalents for those words, but those are words in Eskimo. Is that the language they use? They're Inuit or what?
I'm not sure. Yeah.
But that language itself it's written in different ways. There's certain characters and like we're talking about different things. There was this one funny meme I saw with like people who like invent an alphabet for your language, use it. Take somebody else's alphabet, use it. And like Japanese, it was like, don't have an alphabet, take your neighbor's language, butcher it up, and then like add two other languages that you mixed together, like when they were using the kanji and then different kind of like things, the katakana or whatever. So those things, it's like a symbol makes like several words and you added different things. So those kind of things, certain things are expressed in certain ways that can't be conveyed in other languages. So just thinking you can condense things to just 30-second, 60-second, 90-second bites, that's not accurate. At least it's very limited. The sort of things you can get in that way are very limited, and you're going to lose certain things in life. And maybe that's the thing. Maybe they're speaking to those kind of people, and maybe we're the ones who are overestimating what the average human can actually deal with. I don't know.
Well, it's funny because like when I started delving into German a bit on my own, I started looking at how some of the words they use and how they're translated, and they sound really funny in English. Like to say to have luck, they say Schwein haben, which means to have pig. So like there's things like that, but it's like if you translate it verbally, it sounds funny. And then some of their There's slang too, like for gay guys, they call them Arschjunge, which means ass boy. Like there's things like that that like if you translate word for word, it sounds really funny, but you're like, okay, you get what it means. But things like that, it's like you say, it's like you have to actually learn the language and understand, okay, this is how they express things. It's like it's not like you can just like when I first started learning French, this was a challenge I have, because English is my primary language. In my head, I'm translating everything into English verbatim, but then you read that out and it sounds really weird. And then the reverse happens too because of the grammar. So you really have to think in a different pattern, which is tough. But like we're saying, it's not something you can learn in like 2 minutes. It's something you have to spend a lot of time delving into.
Yeah. And it's a question for the people out there. Do you find yourself that? And I do know there is some time where it's like information paralysis, where there's a lot of things to do, and I've fallen into that sometimes. But it's also the kind of thing where it's happened to me on the inverse, where I just hearing all these sources telling me America is racist, America hates you, you're an African, you're not going to be able to do all these things. Men are sexist, men are oppressive, and all these things. And I'm thinking, am I oppressive? Am I sexist? Does America really hate me? And I'm listening to all these people and all these sources telling me this thing. And that made me kind of just not take the time to focus on my actual experience of the people that I know and look at other sources. And I was like, okay, maybe that's not quite accurate. And then I haven't been to Stormfront yet, but hearing other people made me less racist in that sense of thinking like, oh, white people are superior to black people because they're the ones who can affect our lives in different ways, or men are superior to women because just by existing we oppress them. Like, no, men don't have that magical type of environment over women. I know very strong women in my life that I'm not oppressing by my mere presence. Like, they've
No.
actually inspired me in certain ways. So it made me get over some of these bigotries by looking past this. So the general SIFT kind of idea is generally positive, but when they start mentioning, oh, Google, Wikipedia, question marks come up.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
All right. So my turn, right?
Yeah.
Okay. SIFT has its limits. It's designed for casual news consumers, not experts or those attempting to do deep research. A reporter working on an investigative story or trying to synthesize complex information will have to go deep. But for someone just trying to figure out a basic fact, it's not helpful to get bogged down. Quote, we've been trained to think that Googling or just checking one resource we trust is almost like cheating, end quote. He said, but, quote, when people search Google, the best results may not always be first, but the good information is usually near the top. Often you see a pattern and the links of a consensus that has been formed, but deeper into the process, it often gets weirder. It's important to know when to stop, end quote.
Oh, man.
Okay,
Oh,
so
man.
this all I thought when I read this is that whole thing about how if you Google Trump and Hillary, how it was all negative articles for Trump, all negative articles for Hillary. It's like, you mean to tell me that's unbiased, that's
You mean all
objective, really?
positive
Yeah.
arguments for Hillary.
What's that?
You said negative for both. You mean positive for
Oh,
Hillary.
sorry. Yeah, negative for Trump, positive for Hillary. You mean to tell me that's how reality is? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's important to know when to stop. Yes, but who went in when there is no point to stop. And an odd thing they talk about, we've been trained to think that Googling or just checking one source, and even that kind of betrays the training that this individual has been through. The fact that most people think internet searching is Googling. It's like,
Yeah.
no, that's now a term. It's kind of like when people talk about the plastic sandwich bags, they say Ziploc. There's a term for this when an actual brand of something becomes the term that substitutes the actual
Yeah.
name of that thing. And when people say, I'm going to Google this, I actually actively try not to say that anymore
Yeah.
because it's that kind of thing. Like switch to the Brave browser, switch to DuckDuckGo mostly. I have some of the things on Chrome because it's still a good service. Even the Brave browser is built off of Chrome. But there's kind of things like that where I'll try to use multiple sources. If I'm looking up something, I'll see, okay, what is happening on these two different browsers? Try to see the difference that's happening there too, because there's coding there, there's people behind these things, there's people that have their opinion. But just like I said, you've been trained to think that Googling, instead of that searching online, using an internet search engine, it's an interesting thing that people kind of go through with these things.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, so Christina Ladam, an assistant political science professor at the University of Nevada, Reno, has seen the damage firsthand. While teaching an introductory class as a PhD student in 2015, she noticed her students had trouble vetting sources and distinguishing credible news from untrustworthy information. During one research assignment at the 2016 presidential race, multiple students cited a debunked claim from a satirical website claiming that Ben Carson, a candidate that year, had been endorsed by the Ku Klux Klan. Some of these students had never had somebody even talk to them about checking sources or looking for fake news, she told me. It was just uncritical acceptance if it fit with a narrative in their head, or complete rejection if it didn't. Miss Landa started teaching a SIFT-based military literacy unit in her political science classes because of the method's practical application. The unit is short, only 2 weeks long. Her students latch onto quick tricks like how to hover above a Twitter handle and see if the account looks legitimate, or is a parody account or impersonation. They learned how to reverse image search using Google to check if a photo has been doctored or if similar photos have been published by trusted news outlets. Students were taught to identify claims in Facebook or Instagram posts, and with a few searches, decide if they're unsure of the veracity, whether the account seems to be a trustworthy guide, or if they should look elsewhere. All right.
All right, so this goes to your point at the start about public schools and critical thinking. It's like, you've already been in school for how long? If you've been in school for this long and you're duped by misinformation, what does that say about the quality of education you're receiving in schools? It's like you've memorized a bunch of disconnected facts that you probably will never use again, but you can't tell apart misinformation. And also, the other issues I had with what she's saying, number one, this is anecdotal. Like, yeah, I'm sure there are students who believe absurdities like that. But notice too, that she's criticizing Republicans. Like, how many they don't use the good people on both sides example. They don't use people who believed in Golden Gate, that, Trump went to a hotel and let Russian prostitutes pee on him. There were people I knew who believed that for a time, but of course that was debunked. Russiagate, we heard about that for how many years? That was debunked. So notice they're eager to attack information on the right, but on the left, it's like they look the other way. And it's like, I'm wondering, are these people the types who know that was misinformation? They're using a Republican example, or is it that they live in that echo chamber? They're just convinced that this is right.
No, this is the thing that this is a question that we had when you're talking about the cracks in the ivory tower thing. This is somebody, a PhD student, teaching in 2015. So this is after how many years of education, schooling, and the system being set in, how much money has been poured in. Yeah. And you still have people getting into college that don't know to just scroll over a Twitter. It doesn't come to them. They need somebody to train them to think about scrolling over a Twitter account to see if it's satirical. Yeah. That, to me, is odd. But, I mean, there's evidence. So, like, again, I might just be... Some of these things are basic, and I do see these mistakes being made. Somebody posts something, I'm like, don't post this unless you have the link. Like, double check. Like, because for me, it's just natural. It's something that I do. It's something that I've been inquisitive in doing I didn't take a course on this. It's just, but then like we mentioned before, you read the Bible, you read the Quran, you read the Torah, and people believe that stuff. So I guess like we were talking about how we're still in infancy. Yeah, like if a baby was believing something, like my nephew, this amazing kid, he's about 5 or 6 now, and he found this book. It was the guy who wrote World War Z, but he wrote a book like it was like a guide to dealing with zombies. Like, it was written more like you're presenting a paper or a white paper to a government body for them to be prepared for it. So that's how the book is written, and my sister has it. He found it, and he started reading. He kind of trained himself to like read longer words and now actually make sense of things. Yeah. And he found, he was like, hey, Mom, why does Uncle Silas have this? Are zombies a real thing? Because it was written like in a straight way. But he's like 5, he's like 6. So it's like for him, it's like, you got to have the conversation with him. But I have to just keep reminding myself that, people might be of adult age, but what do I know about the K through 12 system that would make me assume that they would be able to think this? Like, there has been it's not the critical thinking that as we're taught. It's the lack of critical thinking, which is part of our questions or objections to the current system, because it doesn't teach. Because after 12 years, there's still people who would believe in something like the Ku Klux Klan thing without actually going in and checking. So and then with Miss Ladan, like, good for you. Like, thanks for trying to help, trying to get that situation. Because this needs to be addressed. It's ridiculous, and you still see this. I think right now with Ted Cruz, there was something that was posted. It was a Photoshop done of Ted Cruz after he went to Cancun during the current issues going on in Texas with a winter spell, and there was a thing of those chyrons, or not the chyrons, but the things on Fox News. They each took something with his face and some text that he said. Ted Cruz said this, and he was like, it was in retrospect, it was a bad idea. Like, I just watched the movie Coco, and I wanted to see if guitars were real, if love was real. It's this Disney Pixar film. and Coco was one of the lead characters, and I think these dolls and guitars come to life and things like that. And then that was being posted, and the person who posted it was like, "Oh, what is this?" And the person who posted it was posting it as a troll, but it was a blue checkmark account.
Yeah.
And inside the comments, people were like, "I can't believe you said this. This is abhorrent. I can't believe this." And then somebody commented and said, "By people who think this is real, that says something about how stupid they think Ted Cruz is."
Yeah.
Then to me, no. It's immediately for me. People who think that's real, that says something about them. That says something about you if you think that, despite how ridiculous the world is, that even if Ted Cruz had was gullible enough to believe Coco was an actual real thing and then actually do that, because he believes in other things that I consider just as demonstrably false, like things in the Bible, these stories, these made up stories, but he would not say it on Fox News. Like, he would not come out and say it. So to me, that was clearly a joke.
Yeah.
But to people, if you don't really understand, if you can't pick up that as a parody, then maybe we do these things.
Well, again, it goes to the point of what I said about the left-wing audience, the left-wing comedians earlier in their audiences, that they've seen people edited out of context all the time, so they think they're getting the full story, and they just keep going back to that, and it keeps reinforcing that bias. So they think that their opponents actually believe all these absurd things. And I remember a friend of mine was debating with someone I know about this, and the person was like, well, the subject they're making fun of is already ridiculous. I'm like, well, they're not being represented fairly. They're edited out of context and mocked. And if you live outside of that echo chamber, you realize that's how they operate. But if all you watch are those shows, you think that's the full story. And I think with some of these people, that's basically what happens. It's like, you live in that echo chamber where you take the most ridiculous views of your opponents and think you're getting told the full story, but it's because you've only seen things edited out of context or the absolute worst people emphasize. You haven't listened to you haven't read things by the people, listen to long unedited things, and then weighed your own opinions. And I feel like that's the angle that this article is pushing, essentially. Yeah. Like, it's better to watch them out of context and mock them than to read what they say, read what people say about them, read their opponents, and then just weigh everything side by side. They don't want you to do that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just trying to think how trusting I was in things before. Like, there was a time when I would just fall for these, and I mean,
I used to be one of those people who watched Jon Stewart all the time and all that. Now it's been a number of years, but like my friend said, learning this stuff is how you're able to see through the propaganda.
Yeah, good point. Because it was around my college years when I would watch Jon Stewart, like, he's more accurate than the news. But I think even at that time, I was saying things like, at least he makes a joke out of it, but you still get actual more information from it. Yeah, so I guess was in that standpoint. So I guess that's the effect from having things like that and lauding those people. This is part of the effect that we see, and this is part of the human species growing out of its infancy and becoming a toddler as a sentient species, I guess. Yeah. All right. So hit us off with the next one.
All right. The goal isn't to make political judgments or to talk students out of a particular point of view, but try to get them to understand the context of a source of information and make decisions about its credibility. Bullshit. The course is not precious about overly academic sources either. Quote, the students are confused when I tell them to try and trace something down with a quick Wikipedia search because they've been told not to do it. She said, not for research papers, but if you're trying to find out if a site is legitimate or if somebody has a history as a conspiracy theorist and you show them how to follow the page citations, it's quick and effective, which means it's more likely to be used.
Yes, you're using it as a direction. As we mentioned, there is some bias. The people who would say stuff like, they wouldn't say someone like AOC would be a conspiracy theorist, because anything that she says that's off the wall is often excused, or it's actually said like, no, she believes, she just says the things that are, she will repeat things that are accepted consensus among the preferred and selected groups, because Stormfront has a consensus about what America as a country is. Nicole Hannah-Jones has a consensus about what America is and how it came to be. Stormfront will tell you about about how brave white men came together to do these things to build a white nation, and that's what they're looking for. Nicole Hannah-Jones will tell you evil white men came together to create this white nation on the blood and bones of black people, and that's the evil thing that it is now. So both those people are talking about conspiracies of white men doing something to create what they think America is now, which may not be what America actually is. But one of those will be considered a conspiracy theory. The other one will just be considered a reimagining of history that is now approved to be taught in all sorts of universities and schools all over the place. So that's the bias that comes in because it's still humans. But as she mentioned here, using it as something that you use it for the sources, I still do that. Like I even go like particularly, I prefer how I get into like anime and manga and these other creative universes, and I like when you go to the actual pages of those actual things rather than going to other random sites because people come in and they collect ideas and stories of the characters, locations, things like that. You can find different things. So the Wikipedia idea and structure to me is not a negative thing, but it's just using it as the end all be all source, as she's mentioned here, is not the positive thing to do. So good on her. I'm with her on that one.
Yeah, and I mean, it's okay, like, if you want to look up, like, information about movies, like, broad stuff, like, hey, was this actor in this movie? Or, you know, like, statistics about a state, for example, or something like that. My problem is when it gets into the politics and they start editorializing and it's clear, okay, they're favoring certain people and attacking others. Like, if you read Murray Rothbard's page on there, it's largely a hatchet job. Some of the other people we like too, same thing. But then if you, like we say, you read AOC, it's all going to be glowing stuff. And it's like, is that the full story? No.
Okay. Yeah. So here we go. So as a journalist who can be a bit of a snob about research methods, it makes me anxious to type this advice. Use Wikipedia for quick guidance. I guess he agrees, kind of. Spend less time torturing yourself with complex primary sources. A part of my brain hears this and reflexively worries these methods could be exploited by conspiracy theorists. But listening to Ms. Landam and Mr. Caulfield describe disinformation dynamics, it seems that snobs like me really have it backwards. Yeah, so maybe we're also part of these snobs. Think about YouTube conspiracy theorists or many QAnon or anti-vaccine influencers. Their tactic, as Mr. Caulfield noted, is to flatter viewers while overloading them with 3-hour videos laced with debunked claims and pseudoscience, as well as legitimate information. The internet offers this illusion of explanatory depth, he said. Until 20 seconds ago, you never thought about, say, race and IQ, but now suddenly someone is treating you like an expert. It's flattering your intellect, and so you engage, but you don't really stand a chance. You want to say something?
Well, I was going to say it's funny because they always make these criticisms of the alt-right, but the same stuff, literally the same stuff applies to the critical race theory crowd. Like, yes, there are truths in what they're saying about segregation, about black people not having the same rights, all that. The problem is they make a lot of other claims. There's a lot of faulty premises. There's a lot of claims that can't be proven. They don't allow it to be questioned, and the prescriptions are, you know, quite frankly, pretty destructive. So it's a similar thing where they sort of lure you in with some things that are true, because that they've explained that's how the alt-right lure people in with the race and IQ stuff, that, you know, oh, you know, you've been told everyone's equal. That's a lie. We're going to tell you how things really are. But they do the same thing, though. It's like that's where the expression woke comes from. We're awake. We know how things are. We're going to wake you up to how things really are. It's the exact same tactic. It's just different talking points.
Yeah, because the general premise of there's something genetic about being X that means you can do Y, which anyone who's not X can't do. That's the general premise of racism. Now, with racism, it's like something being X is preferential to everything else due to its ability, X's ability to do Y. Now, that's when you bring the IQ things. But then people say that about other things. By somebody being black, they have a special genetic aspect about being black that means they can say certain things that are not considered negative because they don't have the power and the structure and all these things and those kind of things. So they add other aspects to it, but when it comes down to it, it's still, by virtue of being X, you're the only one that can do all these other things on the side here. So when it comes to that, what is the actual intrinsic difference? And as they mentioned here, we were talking about that earlier, about how we talked about how with certain sources, they'll have 90% positive things, then they'll add something else that's not true, and then those positive things will get you. So this person is seeing that too, but they might be seeing it from a different point of view and saying like some of the things we might consider positive to be the thing where it's false, and some of the things they might consider positive, we might consider those things to be false. So that's part of what's out there. That's part of the information that's out there. But I encourage you, get as much of that information. If something's important to you, don't take that 30, 60, 90 seconds. Take your time and actually go in there and watch those long videos. If there's an issue, if they're giving you that much information, then there should be that much more information for you to actually go and counter it. And as the person mentioned, yes, some of the stuff is real and true, then don't address the real and true. Be able to go in there and challenge yourself to find that one part that is wrong and then address that part alone. And I've seen people talking about things in that kind of way, and I think it's a positive thing to do.
Yeah, it's like we discussed in 1619. People like, the founding fathers owned slaves. Segregation to this. Like, guys, we know all this. These facts are true and indisputable. What we're getting into is issues like, the critical theorists opposing the civil rights movement. We're getting into what their solutions are for these things. We're getting into their rejection of reason in science. Those are the issues. Nobody's denying those basic historical facts, but they try to hold those up as like some sort of proof of legitimacy. Like, oh, we're holding up these things. We're on the side of the oppressed. We're doing the noble thing. And again, like we just said with the alt-right, it's the same thing. It's, they're lying to you. Here's how things really are. And it's like, yeah, I can acknowledge the true claims, but that doesn't mean your whole worldview is automatically right by default.
Yeah, and here they're talking about someone who's treating you like an expert, is flattering your intellect. There is something about that with the IQs, where they say, "Oh, look at all these people," and I've made several videos talking about this, where it's just an absurdity. It's like, yeah, you're going to say that, oh, the top IQs in the world happen to be white, which is you're also genetically white. So it's like, yeah, that doesn't make you smart. No. It makes those people smart. Like, it's the same kind of way where it's like, if you say, oh, Albert Einstein was a Jew, so that means all the Jews, like you as a Jew, are taking his thing, or oh, like just because this German inventor invented this amazing thing, like this is the thing with like Beethoven. I was like, okay, is Beethoven just German people's music because he was German? Like, or is that German possession? Like, is every German? Should I thank random Germans on the street for Beethoven's existence? Like, no, I don't do that because Beethoven is an individual. So, the same way, if the Germans could say Beethoven being one of the greatest classical musicians ever means there's something inherent about being German that makes you a great classical musician, then I would also say, I guess Hitler was Austrian, but it's in the same kind of area. But then you say, okay, if you're going to take all the positive things from the small percentage of people in your genetic group, in your in-group, that happen to do good things or achieved really positive things, if you're saying they're indicative of you, then I can also hold you by that same reason to the negative things that those small groups of people, because people say, it was only 2% of white people that own slaves, so it's not on me. I agree, it's not on you. But it's only 2% of white people that invented stuff, so it's also not on you. I'm not also not giving you credit for the inventors of those few people. And I was going to say one more thing. I kind of forgot. What was I going to say? Something with information. Go ahead if you have anything to say. If I remember, I'll say it.
That's pretty much it. I was going to just continue.
In that was the thing with the it's going to bug me. It's not going to come back. We were talking about the things of the percentage of the people and the thoughts of the things. Oh yeah, they were talking about here with IQ, and some of the people who haven't achieved much do fall for this. They personally haven't done much in their life, and then they hear like, oh, but being white means you're of a higher stock, you're a better sort of human being, you're this higher Ubermensch type of thing. We have this higher IQ. Like, yeah, I might not have achieved much, but at least I'm genetically better than all these brownies. At least I'm genetically better than these people of color. So that does appeal to a certain amount of people out there. But on the inverse, the people on the political left also have that. They haven't achieved much in their life, but then they're told, you are inherently part of a race that is superior, that has power. You're just the power race. You're the race that just your simple voice speaking about something or speaking against something, you have abilities to mention something, and then your voice, the words that you utter on Twitter, in your small Twitter, could somehow go out and tear down Oprah, the multi-billionaire who's done all these things. You might be some poor white person in some hill somewhere that hasn't achieved anything much in your life, but just know you have the power to just say, I'm with you, Oprah. And all of a sudden, Oprah, who's worked her life and earned billions and met all these people, presidents and popes, and done all these things, she'll be empowered by your simple choice to say words. So that's also in there. That wishful thinking is also in there that appeals to them in some kind of way. And both of those come from something racial that I do not want to subscribe to, and I encourage nobody else out there to subscribe to either.
Yeah. All right. My turn, was it? Or what he described as a kind of informational hubris we have that is quite difficult to fight. But what SIFT and Mr. Caulfield's lessons seem to do is flatter their students in a different way by reminding us our attention is precious. The goal of SIFT isn't to be the arbiter of truth, but to instill a reflex that asks if something is worth one's time and attention and to turn away if it's not. Because the method is less interested in political judgments, Mr. Caulfield and Miss Landham noticed, Latham, I keep saying Latham, students across the political spectrum are more likely to embrace it. By the end of the 2-week course, Ms. Latham said students are better at finding primary sources for research papers. In discussions, they're less likely to fall back on motivated reasoning. Students tend to be less defensive when confronted with a piece of information they disagree with. Even if their opinions on a broader issue don't change, a window is open that makes conversation possible. Perhaps most promising, She has seen her students share the methods with family members who post dubious news stories online. Quote, it sounds so simple, but I think that teaching people how to check their news sources by even a quick Wikipedia can have profound effects, she said. All right.
Yeah. Again, if I'm hoping the students are carrying it on to use like Wikipedia as a landing point, as a launching point for
Yeah.
deeper sources, or just giving people general ideas on things, and depending on the other sources they can throw in as well. And Wikipedia is an ongoing project that could improve, could get worse, also depending on the content as well. And just in general, some of the things in here are not disagreeable. Yeah, it's good to search on these things. And again, I might be forgetting what it was like to be a 16-year-old, 14-year-old, like with hormones and all these other interests in your life where you're not that critical. You're not thinking that critically about things, but I could just be, again, I could just be making a wrong estimation about, because they say they take it to the family members as well. And this is the whole thing. It's like, this is the universal suffrage. These people vote. Like, if they're not able to double check these basic things, then what are they voting on when they make those decisions to go on and who's going to pick and be an expert on other things? If they themselves are not able to understand basic information, how can they understand who the experts are that can understand that information? That's a question that I keep asking people who support things like universal suffrage and rule by democracy, and I haven't been finding good answers, if any, to address that point.
No. And my concern too, as I keep criticizing the New York Times bias, my concern with stuff like this is do the criticisms only go in one direction? Like when they talk about misinformation, like if she had said, if this Miss Ladam wrote something like, they know that the Klan didn't support Ben Carson, they also know that Russiagate was a hoax. If they provided examples of things on both sides, I would be a little more trusting, because I would say, okay, you're calling out information on both sides. I guess the journalists that I prefer are people who do things like that. But my concern is that the New York Times, the way it leans, I feel like she's just going to be focused on misinformation coming from the right and ignore all the stuff on the left. That's kind of where, for me, an article like this would have less credibility if you gave examples of both. And there are some articles that do things like that, I would say sure, but it's like I know that they're doing, the New York Times, it's doing its usual tactic of framing it like they're trying to just present objective facts, but then when they get into those facts, they're clearly slanted one way. That's my issue.
And that's the thing. If you push this through and you try to hold these consistent, so I think even if some people might skew one way, as human beings tend to skew more politically left on social issues and youth, that seems to be the things that happens. I think it goes even beyond the fact that most of the people who have majority of the time with children at that time also are that way, and these things seep through the way they teach and topics. It could be a simple thing. It might not be, even if they're going directly in the curriculum, a teacher is going to have a different reaction to certain individual personal interactions that go towards her ethics and her morals, that are more to do with her politics, that could be outside of it. Even if the teacher is just teaching you straight algebra, if there's a certain interaction in the community that she thinks is a certain thing, she'll say something. Like if a black kid says something to a white kid about him being a cracker, she probably won't say anything. But if the white kid says something possibly disparaging of the black kid, she might act in a certain way. And the kids will pick up on that, even if it's subconsciously, they'll pick up on that and see, okay, that's the things that are in there, and that will make them skew a certain way. There's just general things when some of the surface level things, some of the things on the left sound a little better, but when you actually look deep into it, because when it comes down to socialism, things like, I don't even think it sounds good. Like the whole idea everything is equal. People don't want to be equal. Even though remember the equality, like they're talking about here, people feel good about being an expert. People talk about the individuality, we're special snowflakes and all these things. People understand it actually is better to be exceptional. It is better to have that individuality because that's who we are. It's more accurate to reality. So this whole idea of sameness is something that I think we inherently have some certain dislike or questioning of that kind of sameness.
Well, I just thought even in terms of social media, I mean, people brag, oh, I have this many followers. Oh, my photo got this many likes. It's this many more than this person. I have a bigger following than this person. It's like nobody is out there saying everyone's page should be viewed the exact same amount of times. Everyone should get the exact same amount of likes. Nobody works like that in reality. Oh, we should give everyone the same likes so everyone feels good about themselves. No, nobody is saying that.
So I'm sure somebody is somewhere.
Somebody somewhere, yeah.
When they take away wasn't there something? Didn't they do that for some time when Instagram they took away likes for some time?
Oh, I don't know.
I think there's there's something in Instagram that was taken away, I think, for some time and might have been brought back, or I don't know. I definitely think, well, it's like the whole kind of carry thing when that was added on Facebook, that was like added as a negative thing, but like the interaction thing, remember it was just likes? They should have likes and dislikes. But anyway, all right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
next, let's finish this off. I think I might just go with the last three, and then we can
Okay.
finish this off.
Sure.
Okay. So SIFT is not an antidote to misinformation. Poor media literacy is just one component of a broader problem that includes most culpable actors like politicians, platforms, and conspiracy peddlers. If powerful, influential people with the ability to command vast quantities of attention use that power to warp reality and platforms don't intervene, no mnemonic device can stop them. But SIFT may add a bit of friction into the system. Most important, it urges us to take the attention we save with SIFT and apply it to issues that matter to us. No problem with that. Sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, we are taking the scarcest, most valuable resource we have, attention. That's pretty true. And we're using it to try and repair the horribly broken information ecosystem, Mr. Caulfield said. We're throwing good money after bad. What? Anyway. Okay, that's I agree. Yeah. Our focus isn't free, but we're giving it away with every glance at a screen. But it doesn't have to be that way. In fact, the economics are in our favor. Demand for our attention is at an all-time high, and we control supply. It's time we increased our price. Okay, so the Times is committed to publishing a diversity of letters to the editor. We'd like to hear what you think about this and any of our articles. Here's some tips. So yeah, you can write to them if you want to. I shall not. This conversation is me saying when I think about this. But yeah, go ahead.
Again, superficially, I agree with some of what they're saying about how people can get sucked down misinformation. Again, my problem is they're not like, if I were writing an article like this, I would give examples on the left and the right of misinformation. Just like, I mean, I have my own biases, but I think that would sort of bring to make the point that I'm speaking from first principles. I'm not trying to appeal to a certain audience where I read stuff like this and I can't help but thinking they're only going to criticize misinformation on the right and they're going to ignore all the stuff on the left. And it's like, that's not really reporting. And it's not really, if you're operating from first principles, it's not really making the point they're trying to. It's just very selectively applied. That's where this doesn't sit well with me.
Well, in the defense here, I think the misinformation quoted could have been from the left. At least one example, the Ben Carson thing. I don't think people on the political right who are supportive of Ben Carson would have been saying that he'd been endorsed by the KKK, because I think they would think that would be a negative thing. Even the people on the right, unless you actually were on Stormfront or in the actual KKK, you might consider that a positive thing. But then if you actually were in the KKK, you'd be racist enough to not want to endorse Ben Carson. So that would be like a double negative. So it's kind of hard to actually get to that point. So I think if anything, that would be some disinformation from probably somebody on the leftist source that will be trying to dissuade people, trying to paint Ben Carson as some sort of Uncle Tom and saying like, yeah, you guys think, oh, he's because he's a black guy, but no, he's, if anything, if I could find the source of something like that, I would assume that would be somebody on the political left. So at least providing that as an example shows a form of misinformation that is deleterious to somebody on the political right from that mistake.
Yeah.
All right. And what else here? The focus is free. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Focus isn't free. Attention is one of the most valuable things that we do. The actions that we have, the things we choose to do or not to do. You're exchanging that. Everything is about exchanges. Thomas Sowell says that life is about the trades. There's an actual term that he uses. Do you remember the term that he actually uses?
Wait, say what is it one more time?
Thomas Sowell says something about life is about
trade-offs.
Trades. Does he say
trade-offs? Trade-offs. He always says. Yeah.
Trade-offs. It's like, if you're doing this, you're not doing that. If you're listening to this video, thanks for listening to it. But for however long you've listened to it, you haven't been listening to something else. So they think that is an accurate thing. If something is important to you, try to establish what truly is important to you and put time into that. Is it really that important to get X amount of likes by taking the perfect kind of pose and angle on your thing? Is it really that important to get into certain debates with people in certain comment sections about certain things that are random? Some of those things might not be that important. So I do agree with them here on that one, where don't put too much attention into those things, and it is possible to just find yourself in those. But some of those rabbit holes, if it's an important thing, jump in that rabbit hole, go in there. Like the whole story of Alice in Wonderland was a grand story. If you didn't jump in that rabbit hole, there never would have been the Alice in Wonderland story, and I think she'd have been less of a person for not having experienced that amazing rabbit hole story that she's been into. And yeah, so I think
Well, and some of this
again,
stuff too, just to sort of add to your point, some of this I've just learned from experience. Like I used to debate random people all the time, but then you realize these conversations go in circles with nobody learning anything, nobody's minds change, and you do it over and over, and you're like, I've probably wasted hours of my life doing this, and then it's like, now I'll debate someone if the person is truly interested in hearing my point of view and is actually listening to what I say, sure. But like after a while, I learn who those people are. If it's just random people online that are just going to dismiss everything I say, and plus, I think too, social media, the way it's set up, it's not the best format for it because oftentimes it's like you write out these long explanations, they get skim read, and the person just ignores you anyway, or the person just resorts to personal attacks. Or it's not really the best medium for it anyway. So I don't know.
yeah. It depends on the things because I enjoy having these conversations. I think about different things when we have these kind of flowing conversations. But I like having access to the internet while we do it. It's like the best of both worlds. Because for me, online, first of all, having my friends and interests spread around, I had the ability to spend time and spend the time to think and research and look into things and see how the internet was developing and things like that. But it's still very new.
Yeah.
So some of the things that we use are still at its very like beta versions of this. There's going to be better sorts of social networks. There's going to be better forms like Wikipedia is a sort of upgraded form of the Britannica, because you might say the Britannica itself had more rigor in selecting it, but it also had fewer systems of actually getting the actual information because the research abilities, the collection of information, the listing of things was less, and you had to get to a library to find access to the few books that were in there. Whereas now Wikipedia has the access and the reach to that is exponentially larger, but also a lot more people are coming into it. But I think that more information is still more positive than the previous iteration where it was just the Britannica kind of encyclopedias of maybe like 100,000 books for the 3 or 4 million people in the world that were available. But now it's like that website can be probably accessed by 3 to 4 million people who are around those things and on a daily basis. Probably this last hour or so that we've listened to have been accessed by that many. So that's not a negative thing. And choosing that, finding that, and that's something that, as you mentioned, when we are younger, and maybe that's true again with this article from the title, but this also goes to the clickbait thing. I think from my expectation of the actual title is Charlie Warzel did a much better job at purporting himself. I don't know what his other articles and things have been with the actual article that he presented versus what he wrote from the thing. And again, this is also a business. Yeah. Charlie Warzel knows what he's doing in the sense. New York Times know what's going to get people to click. If he had written, if this was written opinion, choose what you research in a better way. Critical thinking says critical thinking is a process rather than a method or something. If that was the title, you probably wouldn't have posted it. I probably wouldn't have thought, let's actually read this as a thing, and we probably wouldn't have had this information. So there is some clickbait aspect in there, and the actual content of it, I think, has been a rather positive. At least it's in the last thing we read was a New York. There was the Times article with the secret cabal that fortified the election. That one was more abhorrent. The actual content, the brazen nature of the things. It's still not surprising, but this one, I think, what I expected was. I don't know what I really expected, but I think it's been better than it could have been from this kind of thing. He even mentioned critical thinking a few times, but he never actually explained out the system or said critical thinking is negative or even set up the premise of...
Well, again, my problem was a little bit of that, like, oh, that's for experts, not for casual news readers. And like, part of that I get, like, okay, not everyone is going to spend hours reading news every day. Like I know Tim Pool says for his shows, he wakes up early and just reads like 100 articles or whatever, then we'll pick out certain ones. I understand not everyone does that, but at the same time, I don't know. It's like maybe it's just my personality. I don't know. I think people should delve deeper into things rather than just read a few headlines and say, okay, I'm informed. That's just things are usually go beyond that.
So he did detract what critical thinking or say what critical thinking has been taught as. But with what you said right there, I think my advice is this. You don't have to delve deep into everything. But if you're going to have an opinion on something and make statements based on that thing, please at least have done the basic research. If you haven't done that, just say, I heard this or I think this. Don't state it as fact. Don't make declarations. But you can say, I heard this information, and that's different. And that's kind of the thing I was mentioning with the New York Times article thing before with the guy who was the Capitol Hill person. When they list that, if it's something that I'm reading on Q or some other source like that, I'm like, yeah, these people are just saying hearsay. They're just saying things that they heard from somebody. I don't expect them to check
No.
because of the source that it is.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that's kind of with Wikipedia. Some people might go to Wikipedia and think it's a rigorous source. It's not. It's people saying things about things. So with Q, I had that expectation. If somebody on Q said, "Oh, this cop was killed by somebody by being slammed in the head with a fire extinguisher," I'd be like, "Okay, that's a claim." Like I'll wait to actually search and go in. But when you have the New York Times saying that, and even if they say, "Oh, this cop told me this exact same quote, the law enforcement officials have told me that this policeman was killed by by Trump supporters hitting him with a fire extinguisher." If I heard that on Q, I'd be like, eh. In the New York Times, they quote that same exact thing. A law enforcement officers told us that this law enforcement officer was killed by Trump supporters by being hit. In that sense, I think most people who interact with the New York Times would expect them to have done the bare minimum of checking a medical examiner report and not listing that. So depending on the source, depending on what you're actually saying, you need to have a higher level, you have a higher expectation of, you think to be more critical about certain sources than others. I think that's kind of what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, the skepticism runs one way. Like people see something from Fox, they dismiss it as propaganda immediately, but then they lap up everything from the New York Times or from those comedians, like I mentioned. It's like you should be skeptical of all of it. I'm not running to Fox's defense; they have their biases too. But my point is, you should be skeptical of everything and check a few different sources. And that's one thing Steven Crowder is good on. He even says he's like, my advice to people is read the most biased sources, but on each side. Like read the New York Times, read Slate, read Salon, but then read Fox, Breitbart, and like something else. And then, it's like you feel like you're in different worlds, but the point is at least you have a more complete view. Whereas a lot of times people will say, "Oh, I'm looking for facts. Everyone else is just reaffirming their bias," when it's like in reality they're just reading everything that's slanted one way.
Yeah. Try to keep with the time that we live in. We have unprecedented access to original sources, so try to do that as much as possible. But I don't know. So I think that's it for me.
Yep, that's it. I don't have anything else.
Yeah. So we might divide this up into pieces. I don't know. It'll be under 2 hours, but we've done more 2 hour conversations, and since it's one topic, there might be no reason to break it up into several parts.
Sure.
I have a few other already recorded videos just about some thoughts, some shorter things that I'll post. And Steve and I will be in discussion to set up the first recordings of the next conversation series that will be a longer series on human action. But with the human action, that'll probably be a background thing that we continue doing for some time as we sporadically come in and talk about different articles. And there might even be more mini-series and other things and try to expand the content that we're providing here. And this platform is something that's growing, just like the social media platforms, just like Wikipedia, just like the different sources, just like the human species itself growing into different minds of information. I'm an infoholic and I like being able to present this stuff to you. And hopefully you're one of the people who did not listen to what was written in here. We're like, it's a long video, I'm not going to listen to it. We hope we didn't misinform you too much with anything in here. But any other thoughts you have?
Nope, that's it.
Okay, so guys, gals, and everything else in between, that's it for me, Silas. Goodbye.
Bye, thank you.
All right.